Hi people! In this video lesson I'll show you how to use the GSAP library in order to create a foldable content. I guess everyone thus far have seen show more, show less button someplace on the web. The one that exposes and hides the content. Well, that's what it's all about here. With this tutorial you're gonna need Elementor, Steroids for Elementor plugin, and in case you don't have the Pro version of Elementor, you'll also need a plugin that allows you to add the custom CSS and JavaScript in WordPress. One of these plugins is named Custom CSS and JavaScript, and I'll provide a hyperlink in the description of this video. First, let me present the idea behind the foldable content. I have created a section, one column section only, with two basic widgets, the text editor and the heading widget. Both of these must be in the same column. The text editor should become foldable or expandable, whatever you prefer, while the heading widget has a role of the control button. At this point, I'm going to open the DOM inspector of developer tools, and while still in the editor, I'll quickly do a couple of temporary adjustments, so to speak. I'm going to set the height of the text editor to something smaller than the actual height, something like 200 pixels. As you can see, control button moved up automatically due to the new height of the preceding element. That text peeking below shall become hidden if I overflow the parent element. So I'm adding another CSS property, which is overflow hidden. Let us give it a shot. Okay. In this moment, it's quite clear that my future code will only have to animate the height of the content, while control button remains loose all the time. Before we get our hands into the code, I have to say that the code itself must be reusable and applicable to as many instances of the foldable content as needed, not just one column on a page. That wouldn't make much sense. So on that clue, we have to define the element structure that is based on a custom class names. That's why I'm going to class name the wrapping element, which is the column, and the custom class name will be OB_unfold. The foldable content element, which is the text editor widget, will have a custom class name OB_content. And control button shall be class named OB_blanket. You might use something more appropriate if you like, I can understand that, but be sure to memorize for a later usage. There's also one little thing that might make a huge difference. I want to be able to set the preview height of my foldable element per instance, rather than make it uniform, because sometimes you'll have to allow more content to be visible and sometimes hide as much as possible. So, the question is, how to pass the desired initial height to our future JavaScript code here. One of the quite reliable data exchange methods is to use the data attribute. In Elementor, we are allowed to add the data attribute to the link, and as the heading widget is used in that fashion, I'm simply going to add my attribute to the link options. The hashtag must be provided instead of the URL, otherwise my widget will not be rendered as a hyperlink. And then I'm gonna hit that little cog icon to bring up the link options. I decided to name my data attribute like data unfold height, data dash unfold dash height, after which I have to add the pipe character according to the tip text, followed by the actual value, by the target value, which is going to be 200 pixels. No need to specify the unit, okay? The basic structure is set up. Let's move to the custom code now. In case you didn't enable the GSAP library in Steroids for Elementor, please do that now, or otherwise everything we do won't make much difference, okay? The GSAP library is needed to handle our animations. At this point, I'll rather just copy-paste the entire code that I'm going to need to make things happen. I figure it doesn't make much sense to go with the live typing. It's quicker this way. I guess many people will want to just copy-paste everything and have things work as soon as possible. So if you are one of them, go ahead, skip all up, go back to your Facebook and TikTok because in the description of this video you can find the link to the gist and you can simply copy-paste all. The training file, however, can be purchased in my store for a small fee. If you are interested, please find the link in the description of this video. For those who plan to continue attending the class, so to speak, I'll briefly explain what the code is all about in order to make things as clear as possible. So, I'm using the anonymous function that is supposed to be executed whenever WordPress decides to run it. No worries, it usually happens really fast. First of all, I have to be sure that the DOM content is fully loaded. That's how I can safely run any property or the method of the GSAP library. For that purpose, I'm using the document event listener named DOM content loaded, which fires up as soon as the DOM is ready. The second parameter of my event listener is the function name that is supposed to be called upon successful DOM content loading. My function name is unfold_content. We have a couple of global variables here inside the function. The first one is named close text and is meant to store the default show less text, which is going to replace show more once the content unfolds. The next variable should keep the track of all expandable instances on a page. I'll save them in the array that we are about to loop through in the next code block. I already mentioned that we want to make the code reusable and applicable to every existing or subsequently added instance of the foldable content, so we have to use the loop. The loop says that for each OB unfold element, which is the column, the following must be defined. First, OB state should be closed. I'm using the dot notation to assign the state variable to the object that's currently being looped. There are two states possible, open and closed, and you'll see how it updates once we get to the animation point. Here we have the references to other elements that are a part of the foldable content. If you recall, two widgets were in the game, the text editor with the class name OB content and the heading widget with the class name OB blanket. The content child variable holds the reference to the very first child element of the foldable content itself. Why do we need a reference to the first child element at all? Well, it's because the parent container, OB content, is being cut off, so to speak, and it's also overflow hidden. So the height that it has to unfold to is actually the height of the first child element. Do you remember the peeking text from the beginning? Well, anyhow, it should be much more clear a little bit later in the code. The blanket object variable is where we store the reference to our data attribute element. I hope that you still remember our data unfold height attribute, which I have added to the control button. I said that we can use it to pass the required initial height of the foldable content. The last two variables will be used to store the original text of the control button and the initial height of the foldable content. If you wonder why I simply didn't grab those values yet, well, the reason is that I want to avoid any errors in case you forgot to add the data unfold height attribute. That's why I use the try-catch JavaScript statement. So basically, my chunk of code says that I'm gonna try to grab the required values from my data attribute element in first place, and in case all's good, I'll simply store it to the aforementioned variables. But in case my attempt fails for any reason, I'll catch the error code and pass it to the console so you can know something's wrong without breaking the rest of the code. Hence the fact we are still inside the loop, the return statement at the end shall skip the current iteration and thus exclude the current faulty element from the group. Here's how to set the initial height of the foldable content. For that purpose, I use the GSAP set method. And when you use that method, the animation doesn't happen. It's rather instantaneous. Our control button is the main actor of the game, so to speak, and this is how I attach the click event listener to every instance of such button. And after the click has been done, I have to prevent any default action. If you recall, I inserted a hashtag into the URL input field, which might cause some sudden page jumps. So this is how I can stop it. Here's the point where we decide whether to perform the opening or the closing animation. The logic is quite simple though. If the button state is closed, expand the foldable content. Otherwise, get it back to initial state. Either case, every time the animation is complete, swap the value of the state variable with the opposite. The value of the height property is not static, but rather something that depends on multiple factors, one of which is the viewport width. So with respect to responsiveness, every time our foldable content is about to expand, we have to check how much. That's why I'm using the function that returns the actual height of the first child element. So even though our foldable content has fixed height and is overflow hidden, we are able to find out how much to expand it. Duration and ease are pretty much standard properties that make animations more realistic, or in a way you prefer them to be. You can play with these. Two things left. The first one is to swap the button state variable to the opposite value in order to kind of dispatch the current state of the folding element. In that name, I'm going to use the GSAP onComplete callback or an event. And the second one is to swap the text of my control button to what's been defined in my global variable named closeText. And that should be it when dealing with the opening animation. The else case of the GSAP animation is pretty much identical to the if clause with a few little exceptions. The target height value should be reset to initial state, that's the first one. We also have to update the value of the state variable back to closed because our foldable content becomes closed for real. And the last one, get the text of the control button back to the original. Alrighty, let's get back to Elementor. Let's refresh Editor and see what we are currently dealing with. It's quite understandable that our JavaScript code won't work in Elementor Editor, so any change must be checked in a preview window. What you can see is the skeleton model without any CSS code being applied yet. I have simulated exactly the same model at the beginning. There are 4 minor flaws to this model. First, my foldable content must be overflow hidden. Second, in order to avoid the content hiccups, I have to set the initial height of my foldable content. I know it's 200 pixels in this case, but if multiple or different heights are in a game, you'll have to figure out how to handle it. Maybe with an additional custom class name, why not? Third, the entire control button should look like a link, not just that show more text. And fourth, there's some disrespect of the bottom margin with regards to the text editor widget, as you can see. And now I'll go back to my custom code and do the CSS part. In my existing document, I can simply open a pair of style tags at the very top. My CSS code is supposed to handle the first 3 flaws, while the 4th one should be fixable in the Elementor Editor itself. I said that our JavaScript code won't be functional in the editor, however, the CSS part works just fine, probably because it doesn't represent any kind of a functionality threat, so to speak. That's the main reason I use the body not Elementor Editor active upfront every class name, which says that my CSS rules only apply if out of the Elementor Editor. You can try to omit that body not and see how it affects widgets in the editor. I also added some higher Z index to the control button because some of the Elementor widgets are kept above the auto level of Z index, due to the technical reasons probably. Okay, let's save and get back to Elementor to fix the number 4. I believe that if I add at least 1 pixel of padding to my text editor widget, the bottom margin won't be disrespected anymore. I've seen something like that already. Yeah. Okay, let's save and preview everything once again. Alrighty, here's the result of today's work. It's pretty much unpolished, but everything works fine. Now please allow me to mention a few awesome things about this little project. First of all, by using the proper structure that relies upon the custom class names, you can add as many foldable elements to your page as needed. If I just duplicate the existing column a couple times, I'll be good to go right away. Okay? I could also duplicate the section itself as many times as I want, doesn't make any difference. Another cool thing goes to the fact that the foldable content can be almost any Elementor widget. The gallery widget might be one of them, the template widget could be another one, the intersection widget too, just give it a shot, okay? Things might not work only in case foldable content first child element is not a div kind, or in case the first child div element is overflow hidden. Everything else is perfect. The last awesome thing about it is that it can be used as a better alternative to Elementor's default toggle widget. How exactly? Well, just move all the control buttons from the bottom to the top of the foldable content, okay? It must be inside the column. Of course, don't forget to reduce the height of the visible part to something like 1 pixel or 0, because that's the way to hide the entire content. I believe there's more than just 3 practical usage examples, but I found these to be the most interesting ones. Please let me know if you figure out anything else. I already said that you can buy the training file for a small fee in my store if you like. The file brings some ready-made stuff that you can use for your own projects or study the code, but this is also the way you support my YouTube work and the plugin development. So thank you in advance. I hope that I justified your expectations with this tutorial. Stay well, peace and love.